Thanks for joining us. Our guest today is perhaps one of the fathers of the UK gaming industry as we know it today. We'll let him introduce himself in his own words. Please welcome to the stream, Ian Livingstone. Hello.
Hello. My name is Ian Livingstone, as has been explained, and I've been in the games for some 45 years since co-founding Games Workshop back in 1975, and I'm never going to retire. I love this industry so much, whether it's analog, digital, or just making or playing games or helping others make their own games. I'm there. It's a passion.
Excellent. Well, thank you for joining us today. It's a real honour to have you here, and we were very pleased when you got back to us and said you'd appear. For those of you watching the stream, this is a pre-recorded segment because unfortunately we couldn't work out the schedules quite enough to get Ian live on the day of the 24-hour stream, but he's very kindly agreed to do it the day before and get us all up to speed. So my first question for you, Ian, is what games were you playing when it all got started? What was your game of choice back in the 70s?
Well, I used to play a lot of Monopoly at school, and I also played chess for the school team, but I didn't really enjoy Monopoly much. Obviously, there's a lot of luck involved with Monopoly, but it got me into games in the first place. And so I used to play traditional family games, but then I discovered diplomacy and postal diplomacy. So I just love the negotiations and falling out with people trying to do deals in diplomacy, and then discovered Avalon Hill games and SPI games from the States, board war games, and I also played quite a lot of tabletop miniatures. I had a Macedonian army. Used to useless at painting the figures, but enjoyed playing ancients using War Games Research Group rules, and then of course discovered Dungeons and Dragons.
Yeah.
So, did you play the sort of the chainmail variant that led to Dungeons and Dragons, or did you sort of go straight in at the Dungeons and Dragons end of things?
Straight in. I mean, it's fortuitous. We'd started. There was three school friends: myself, Steve Jackson, and John Peake, who met back in London after university in their case and college in my case, and we was all games players, and we used to play. We had pretty poorly paid jobs and stayed in a lot playing board games. And we just kept talking about, wouldn't it be nice to somehow turn our hobby of playing into something to do with some sort of business enterprise around games. So we thought, well, let's try and reach out to the community, because clearly there's no internet at those times. So we thought we need to make contact with other gamers. So we decided to publish a little fanzine, which we called Owl and Weasel. And we mailed it out to everybody we knew in games, because previously I'd helped Don Turnbull, who was running Albion, as a postal diplomacy magazine. And he gave me his mailing list when he folded the magazine. And so we mailed everybody we knew in games and sent them a free copy of Owl and Weasel. And one of the people who got hold of a copy, although we hadn't sent it to him directly, was Gary Gygax in Lake Geneva, Wisconsin. And he wrote to us and said, "Love your little magazine. Here's this new game I've invented." And that game, of course, was Dungeons and Dragons. So we had very early access. That was the beginning of 1975. And we played it and became immediately obsessed, although John wasn't very impressed by it. But we did decide that we should try and make our business, which was started off as a fanzine and making traditional board games like backgammon boards and Go, to suddenly jump onto this incredible game. Because it didn't look like much, a white box with three largely unintelligible rule books inside it, but when you played it, opened up your imagination like no other game had done before, and I don't think any other game would. So we kind of decided we were going to order as many copies as possible. All the money we had amounted to be able to order 6 copies, but on the back of that order, Gygax's business partner, Brian Bloom, gave us a 3-year exclusive distribution agreement for the whole of Europe, because they were also a very small company. So we were both role-playing businessmen about a role-playing game. So that's how we really got started with D&D. So, and we dedicated issue 6 of Owl and Weasel in June 75 to D&D, how amazing it is, and started selling it mail order. We called the company Games Workshop, largely because John's bedroom was just covered in sawdust and rubbish from the classic games we had been making before that time. And we used to see people out on the street holding copies of Alan Weasel looking for this shop. Of course, there wasn't a shop, but they didn't seem to. Used to open the window, say, "You looking for Games Workshop, mate? Up here." So they used to come upstairs and come into not a shop, but a sort of really terribly,
student flat, as it were.
Well, effectively, a dump full of boxes and stuff. But they'd go away happy having got their copies of D&D. And of course, there was no mobile phones then. We didn't even have a phone in our flat, but there was a public payphone on the ground floor, which the landlord who lived on the ground floor would always get to first, and it was always going to be a telephone sale for us. And he used to hang up on people because he couldn't be bothered talking to them. But people persevered, and they got there in the end. And so Steve and I were desperate to do this full time. We still obviously had part-time jobs. We had full-time jobs, but this was a part-time business. But John didn't want to join us on that adventure, so he left workshop pretty early on. And then Steve and I decided to make a go for it in '76. So we packed our bags, left the flat, went to the States, spent a couple of months kind of touring around delivering cars, and ended up at Gen Con in August '76, and met Gygax and all the other fledgling games companies, signed all exclusives, as many as we could, to become UK distributors, and went back, and that started the adventure of Games Workshop being a full-time job. But we were very naive at that point. We had all these parcels arriving, but we had nowhere to live because we'd packed up our bags from where we were sharing with John. And so we thought, well, we'll go to the bank manager and we'll get a loan and we'll get an office and somewhere to live. So you go into the bank manager's office and say, hello, we're the UK distributor of Dungeons and Dragons. It's a role-playing game which you take on the roles of heroes and wizards and clerics and go on these fantastic journeys of the mind, killing monsters and finding treasure. And the bank manager looked at us a bit like a dog watches television, had absolutely no understanding whatsoever, and asked us to leave quite quickly. So we ended up living in Steve's van for 3 months during the dead of winter, because all we could manage to do was find a small office at the back of an estate agent, which cost about 10 quid a week. And that was our office. So we used to park the van outside this little office. We joined a squash club nearby for a shave and a shower, etc. in the morning, and led this very small triangular life from the mail order office to the van to the squash club. But I guess we called it living the dream.
And snowballed from there, or sort of how did you jump from there into a shop?
Well, it was slow because we still didn't have any working capital, so we had to finance everything out of profit. There was very little because it was still a small mail order business in the main. And but gradually it grew in size, and we ended up opening our first shop in 1978 in Hammersmith, and we were amazed at a queue of over 150 people there. And then it really started to grow, and then we'd started White Dwarf before that in '77. We started Citadel Miniatures with Brian Ansell, and that really started to grow as we instead of importing miniatures, which is very expensive and time consuming, we were able to manufacture our own miniatures. So what we did, I think, was create this kind of hobby atmosphere. We didn't employ traditional retailers to work in the shop. We wanted people who were passionate about games like we were, and through their knowledge and enthusiasm for the games, we kind of created this experience that people enjoyed coming in, and we ended up selling a lot of stuff because people weren't salespeople, but the enthusiasm, kind of generated a lot of sales just because of their own passion, and it was a shared passion with the people who came into the shops.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, as I mentioned before we got started, I run a games shop myself with my other hat on, so I'm entirely with you on that. All of my staff are gamers as well, and well directed passion is key. I think it's a Adam, over for you.
I was going to ask: is the original store still there? Is it has it vanished?
No, it's gone. Well, the building's still there, but it's been turned into a house now. So the shop windows disappeared. It was after the workshop left there, it became the Bosnia and Herzegovina Community Advice Centre for a bit. So that was another. I've got lots of photos of it's evolved over time. So
I like there's one on Wikipedia, and it's just as you said, it's hundreds of people just waiting outside for the opening. I'm guessing it's just the opening day. They're cheating us, but it's crazy to think that. I mean, as you said, it wasn't a snowball, but did you have any foresight? Did you think it was going to become as big as it was, or was it just because it was a passion project?
It's a total passion project. We had no idea. We didn't set off saying we're going to make our fortune in games. We just wanted to be in the business of games. That obviously success was a byproduct, a welcome byproduct of that, but it was never the objective to do it in the first place.
The gamer's dream of getting paid for your hobby.
Yes, yeah. Like we all are. I'm unfortunately a civil servant. Well, I say unfortunately, I shouldn't say that probably. I'm a civil servant still, so I've been writing comic books and obviously running the convention with Simon and Ricky for a little while. So I'm happy where I am. I mean, as you said, it's more about passion than the making money. So I'm happy to truck along like this until the day where I don't need to. I was going to ask you. I discovered yourselves through the Fighting Fantasy books. I genuinely mean, without geeking out. I remember I was in a small little town, at a small little village. I remember the school library had probably Starship Traveler and Forest of Doom and maybe Death Trap Dungeon, battered old copies, probably original copies or maybe second edition copies of them.
One of those.
You've got the new one. He's gone back.
I've been trying to find the original copies. They're not that expensive, fortunately, online. I've also recently picked up the 86 edition of Titan as well.
Yeah, great.
Which is fantastic. I love that. I mean, it's interesting to see. Obviously, the books evolved long after that. Then, but it was interesting to see the maps. That you can't fit into the books. I particularly like Forest of Doom because of the trick. If you don't know the code to the end, you start again.
Yeah.
So,
we used to put anti-cheating mechanisms in White Dwarf in Fighting Fantasy game books, but frankly, I don't care if people cheat. It's fine. I used to see people with their
I'd have my fingers. Yeah.
The 5-fingered bookmark, as we used to call it. People on buses and trains, and that's fine. It's just like peeking around the corner.
I would be honest. Usually, I think it taught me to be an honest person. If I decided that was my decision, usually I'd go down the original route anyway. I know obviously it wasn't an original idea. I mean, there were choose your own adventures and I forget what it's called, tracker books in America. Were they based on that, or was it just?
No, absolutely not at all. No, we were aware of choose your own adventure. I hadn't actually seen any, but the choose your own adventure books were hugely successful, but there was no game system in them. It was just choose your own paragraph, really.
Yes, yeah.
Choose your own ending to the story, effectively. But as D&D players, we wanted to boil down the essence of role playing into replacing the games master with a book, and that's how Fighting Fantasy came about. Effectively, a branching narrative with a simple game system attached to it to give the feeling that it's a role-playing experience rather than just this way or that way. So the way Fighting Fantasy came about was we used to run games days at Workshop, and at Games Day 79, Penguin Books had a stand, and the editor, Geraldine Cook, came over, talked to Steve and I, and said, "This is amazing, all these people playing D&D, they're so into it. Would you be interested in writing a book about the hobby of role-playing?" And we said, well, rather than writing a book about the hobby, why don't we create a book that allows you to kind of experience that role-playing gameplay? And she thought it was a great idea and said, send in a synopsis, which we did, which she then showed to her managing director, who apparently laughed so hard at the idea that banged his head on the table. Said it's preposterous that anyone would want to read an interactive book, which was a non-linear experience. I mean, that's not what books are, he said. So it took her the best part of a year to convince the organisation that this was actually a very good idea. And she was fantastic in her determination to make it happen. But it wasn't until August '82 that the book finally came out. We were finally given the green light to do it, and we called it The Magic Quest was its provisional title. And Steve and I decided that we'd have to do it in two parts. So I wrote the first part of The Warlock of Firetop Mountain as it became known up to the river, and he wrote the adventure after the river up to defeating Zagor the Warlock. It's very difficult to write together an interactive book, but we did it, and it was published in '82. Didn't get a lot of fanfare. We promoted it in White Dwarf magazine, showed it wherever we could at trade shows and conventions. But then it started to sell out in a couple of pockets around the country, largely because of the chat and playgrounds. Clearly, there was no virality or internet at the time, but the word of mouth is very, very powerful. And so Penguin reprinted and reprinted. I think they reprinted like 10 times in the first 2 months. Still didn't have much faith in the idea of an interactive book. And then at last, Gerald came on the phone and said, great news, they want 2 more. And so Steve wrote Citadel of Chaos and I wrote Forest of Doom. But there was press around, but it was largely negative. So the Evangelical Alliance published an 8-page warning guide about them, saying because you're interacting with ghouls and demons, you're bound to get possessed by the devil. Yeah. A worried housewife in deepest suburbia phoned her local radio station saying, having read one of my books, her son levitated. So the kids listening thought, what, for £1.50 I can fly? Great, I'll have some of that. The local vicar around Penguin Books threatened to chain himself to the railings until they were banned. And there were even burns in one country. And there was magazine articles saying the dangers of kids using their imagination too much. And there were petitions sent in. That, parents were worried that their children were become obsessed by this. But at the same time, teachers were beginning to realize that they were actually great for reluctant readers, encourage creative thinking, creative writing, critical thinking, raised literacy levels by 17% after research was done. And so over time, people started to see the benefits of fighting fantasy. And by the way, they were a great fun read because they're kind of in the video games world that was growing. They spoke to people who realized they preferred interactive entertainment because of the engagement and the agency they're given by being in control of their destiny rather than passive entertainment and linear entertainment because you're just a passenger in that experience. So over time, they realized that fighting fantasy was great in multiple ways. And, the proof in the pudding is that they sold over 20 million copies.
I'm really looking forward. My boy's 7 and my daughter's 4, and they're both sort of keen readers for their age. So I'm looking forward to them being just a couple of years down the line and being able to sort of acquire them a set and get them.
The trouble there, I've written a couple of blue ones recently, Port of Peril in 2017 and Assassins of Valencia in 2019. It's difficult now because should I write them for kind of 10-year-olds or 40-year-olds masquerading as 10-year-olds? People who
write them for 10-year-olds. Us 40-year-olds will still read them.
It's great that it's by the test of time.
Yeah.
No, I like. I've got quite a broad taste in literature, but I do enjoy that pulpy feel they have. And the illustrations, obviously, do wonders. That's probably, as you said, usually they passed the initial popularity spawned from word of mouth. That idea when you're trying to describe something and it says, you got muscly barbarians and svelte cat ladies, and you got descriptions of gore and things like that. I remember desperately always trying to hunt for dice. Now, of course, they have the dice at the bottom of the page, but I still don't use them because of much rather actual 2d6s.
Yeah.
But I remember desperately, frantically running around my house, nagging my mum for dice just so I could play these games sometimes, And the people say, "Oh, you can make dice out of pieces of paper," and I'm like, "No, that won't work," So, but it instantly caught my attention. and I'm very grateful for them. I didn't realize until afterwards, my teens and my adult life, that I realized they're all everything. D&D, Tomb Raider as well, and Fighting Fantasy were all connected by yourself. And
yeah.
It's
I mean, it was crazy at the time with Fighting Fantasy because suddenly became a nationwide craze, and we were trying to run Games Workshop, which was now expanding pretty rapidly, and trying to write Fighting Fantasy game books at night. Having a social life of a slug, getting real hassle from girlfriends at the time, but it's very difficult to say no when you're on a roll. So yeah, it was happy days.
So, speaking of the Games Workshop side of things, while you were at Games Workshop, what was the thing that Games Workshop made that you were most proud of during your time there? What was your proudest production?
Well, there are so many great things happening. Opening our first shop, I think, to that queue of 150 people in April '78. That was kind of a milestone moment. It's an incredible feeling to see that what we believed in was shared with other people. And then, of course, releasing some of the games we did, and ultimately Warhammer in '83, as we lost the exclusivity to Dungeons and Dragons. So whilst we'd been exclusive distributor for 3 years until it finally fizzled out in 1979, Gary Gygax suggested that we merge the two companies, his TSR with Games Workshop, but Steve and I, being young Brits at the time, independently minded, said no to that merger proposition because we didn't want to spend half our time in the US, and we wanted to remain independent, and pretty pleased that we did. Ultimately, TSR failed, and they ended up sending the company to Wizards of the Coast. But Workshop steamed on, and opened more shops, and obviously Citadel, and we became more focused on our own intellectual property. That's why the main reason why Warhammer came around is to kind of replace D&D as something which we owned, and value is built around own IP rather than other people's IP, of course. And but we ended up selling out a Workshop in 1991, and some might say that's a poor decision, considering it's now worth £3.5 billion on the London Stock Exchange. But hey, don't look back.
I guess you know what you know at the time, and hindsight's always 2020. But yeah, from Workshop then, when you and Steve sold out, you took a couple of years and then went to IDOS, was it?
No, in 1984, two guys came to see me, the founder of Domark, and asked. Death Trap Dungeon was #1 in the bestsellers list, and they said, would I design their launch title, which was called Eureka, which we had programmed in Hungary for secrecy because there was a £25,000 prize attached to the first person to figure out a number, which was actually a phone number, which you dialed, was on a recording machine in a solicitor's office, and if you were the first to do that, you win 25 grand. So, video games were on the horizon. I was very aware of them. Workshop had been distributing some, selling some, developing our own range of video games. So I decided I took, instead of royalties, I took equity in Domark. And when I sold out a Workshop, I bought more equity in Domark and joined the company as vice chairman. And then 3 years doing that, we had an opportunity to merge 4 UK developers and to create IDOS, which we closed on the stock exchange in '95. And IDOS at that time had Championship Manager and a few other titles. But the big break came when we took out the only other PLC in the space, Centre Gold, and with Centre Gold came Core Design, and with Core Design came a launch title called Lara, Croft, Tomb Raider, and the rest, as I say, is history. The meteoric rise of IDOS, and I was executive chairman, full-time chairman, but my main remit was finding content to develop and publish.
That's crazy as well. I mean, again, it was another thing that was reintroduced into as well. I mean, how many other games were you responsible? Not obviously, no bragging or anything, but how many other games were you responsible for securing then?
Well, I like to put my finger in everybody else's pie, so obviously I can't code, but I know about games design. I like to think and what good looks like. So I was very much instrumental in titles like Deus Ex and Hitman, and and Just Cause, and what else? Well, they're the main ones that come to mind.
I love the Deus Ex games.
Yeah.
While you were there, then what was the IP or the franchise that got away from you that you wish you'd got for the company? What was there a standout?
For IDOS?
Yes. Was there a standout?
Well, I remember having a conversation at a trade show in the US. I think it was E3 or the predecessor was talking to a young startup company called Blizzard about it. But we weren't able to secure that one. I mean, there's been just too many to mention. I mean, it's incredible how games come out. But I've had my successes not just with IDOS, but I left IDOS in 2013 when it was acquired by Square Enix of Japan, because I was never really corporately minded in that. I always see myself as a free spirit and an entrepreneur on a big corporate person. I started investing in independent studios, and was one of the founder investors in Playdemic, who created Golf Clash, huge success on mobile. I was actually a founder investor in Mediatonic that created Fall Guys, and
yes.
And I still have quite a few board positions in video games companies, and also non-exec chairman of Sumo Group, headquartered in Sheffield, and games they develop are things like Sackboy for Sony and some other major titles.
You really meant it that you weren't retiring, didn't you? Anyway,
no chance. But there's also, I love the industry, the people in it. It's a very people are pretty much understated outside of the industry. Nobody knows who the people are who make the games. Game, other entertainment industries like film and music and TV have celebrities, and we don't. So it keeps everyone grounded, and I think it's pretty great people work in the industry, both in board games and in video games. It's a great community and everyone's willing to help each other as well, and that's one of the main reasons. It's all about people, and I just enjoy the people, and obviously I enjoy the games that are developed. I'd say both board games and video games.
Speaking of games, sorry, Adam, you go.
No, I was just going to say, and I think the proof speaks for itself as well. I mean, it's seems like a genuine love. I mean, obviously, look at the background. It seems genuinely.
It's real. It's real. There's over 1,000 games in this room. I run this thing called the Games Night Club, which I've been doing from the 80s. And there's 6 people in there. I do a newsletter after every session. And it's Peter Molyneux in it, pretty famous video games developer, and Steve Jackson's in it, and a couple of other people. And we play board games. We keep a record of the scores after every session, and the end of the year. I publish a newsletter after every session. At the end of the year, we have a cup that's given. It's kind of a spoof gentleman's club, and so the newsletter is really to abuse the other people who play in the club.
Nice. That was actually going to be my next question. Is have you had much chance to play things over the last year or two, and with all of the other many things you're doing day to day? If so, what are you playing recently? For the
last year, we've had a weekly board game session with the same group. We've played 52 weeks on the Spin. So we play on BoardGameArena.com.
Nice.
So we have that window open, and we also have a Zoom window open, so we can do deals and continue to abuse each other face to face, as well as just play on the Board Game Arena. So that's what we do. So obviously we're restricted to the games that are available on the site. So we'll play games like Splendor. What did we played last night? An unpronounceable game.
Oh, we're losing your signal there slightly, Ian. Okay. I didn't count the unpronounceable game. Didn't catch the unpronounceable game. If you could pronounce it.
The unpronounceable game was about hiring a dwarven army. I think it's called Nidavellir. It's a strange name, but it's quite a fun game. So the games we play, say, sometimes we'll play, because it's not on Board Game Arena, we'll play, keep the Zoom window open, have our iPads open so we can play Ticket to Ride. But the games we usually play kind of mid-core. We're too old for the kind of brain-ache games that take 120 minutes plus to play. And we don't play that many simplistic games. So our kind of level is like Small World, Seven Wonders.
Nice. Yep. So kind of mid-range Euros and that sort of thing. Nice.
I was actually just saying about Ticket to Ride to Simon. Of course, Simon is our board game dealer, so I'm desperately trying to get my daughter into things like Ticket to Ride. I recently just picked up a Choose Your Own Adventure board game from Simon called Escape the Dark Sector. So it's fortunately a single player game as well, so I get to play that without anybody else. So, but I'm hoping my daughter will show interest at some point.
Yeah, the Escape the Dark series are very much inspired by the art from the fighting fantasy style books. So it's sort of very 80s looking, but it's a company called Themeborn is I think who make it. It was a successful Kickstarter a few years back, and then they've subsequently released another title. But it's a card driven.
There was a big one. I mean, the Seventh Continent was very much. They contacted me. The company who made it were talking about being inspired by fighting fantasy. I mean, a lot of people say they've been inspired by fighting fantasy. I mean, Dark Souls, a huge video game. Hidetaki told me that he used to read it obviously when they were published in Japan, and it was a great motivator to create Dark Souls. So he said he was very much influenced by it.
It's crazy to see the influence as well. I mean, it's undeniable sometimes. As you said, I think you can spot it. I mean, certainly the Escape game that I picked up, but that's got to give you all sorts of fatherly, proud feelings. When you see things.
Where's my royalty?
That's what I meant.
No, it's great. It's very rewarding in itself. Clearly,
I can imagine. So what's next then? What have you you published a paper about the benefits of games and education as well back in 2010, I think it was.
Yeah, that was the next gen review. It ended up being a review of ICT education in schools. It started off as a whinge to the government about there's simply not enough software engineers, not just for the games industry, but for all digital industries going forward, and that the education system was out of whack with what was actually required in the workplace. And the Ed Vasey, who was the culture minister, tasked me with and Alex Hope to write a review, which was called Next Gen, which you can still download from the Nesta website who published it. And in summary, it was really pointing out that whilst computing in schools was very common in the 1980s, the BBC Micro was the cornerstone of computing in schools, and everyone had a Sinclair Spectrum. To be able to create video games and other content. By the time we complained to Ed, people in schools were learning ICT, which is learning about other people's software. So he's boring kids to death with Word, PowerPoint, and Excel, giving them no insight how to create their own software. So what that meant was really they could play a game, they couldn't make a game, they could use a website, couldn't make a website. So we're teaching them how to read, but not how to write. So our recommendation was saying that computer science should be an essential discipline, and that art should also be seen as a not simply a nice to have, but should form part of the English baccalaureate. Anyway, long story short, we helped convince the government to put the computing curriculum in the national curriculum in 2014. But it's still a dry subject. It's not as creative as it should be, but it's great that it's there at least. There's still a long way to go before people see the joy of creativity through a computer device rather than just an end in itself. But at least it's moving in the right direction. And to make the point, I'm opening what hopefully will be a flagship school for digital creativity in Bournemouth in September. It'll be one of the Aspirations Academy's trust schools. It's been massively oversubscribed, but it'll all be around learning by doing, games-based learning, projects, working with industry, and around using, you can say, using computers to create rather than just to, moving kids from the passenger seat of technology into the driver's seat. Digital literacy is so important. It's almost as important as literacy and numeracy. If you can't be a successful person in the 21st century without understanding how code works, even if you can't code yourself. So it's kind of raising the profile. I mean, it saddens me that so many kids in particular are unemployed, and young people are unemployed. Yet there are tens of thousands of jobs in not just in IT, but in video games and all the digital industries that are left open. So we have to end up having to outsource overseas those jobs. And, it should be part of, if the government is really interested in leveling up and making Britain a place to be successful, then they should start at school to give kids with the right skills, make them work ready and world ready. And we hope to do that with the Livingstone Academy Bournemouth as the first one.
Well, I hope that goes really well. That sounds like a really fun place to be as well. It's a and as you say, it's going to be the way of the future. So let's
I mean, there's always been so much negativity around games, not so much board games, but video games. It's always been people never seen the good things, so it's pointing out the negative side. And yet, if you part your prejudice against one or two titles that children should be playing anyway, cognitively what's happening, you're problem solving, you can't get through a game without problem solving, learning intuitively, you're not punished for making a mistake like you're in an examination, you can go back and everyone can succeed over time. Games like Minecraft with creativity, Roller Coaster Tycoon is effectively a management simulation. I mean, these are all meta skills which you can use in a multidisciplinary way as a contextual hub for learning, and that should be embraced as for a child who interacts with everything, and that's how they enjoy learning, to embrace that sort of learning by doing. We are problem-solving animals, and games are just that.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, it's pleasing to hear that obviously there's somebody like yourself, ahead of things, just championing things like this. It's preaching to the converted here, and all the viewers that'll be watching this, but it's still strange that we're in 2021 and people still think, video games rot your brains, and it's basically the same as people poo-pooing Fighting Fantasy and D&D back in the day as well, thinking that it's going to lead to
witchcraft and Satanism.
Witchcraft and Satanism. It's just mad to think that. I've always found, I know again preaching to the converted, but I've always found it a nourishing thing to do. It's just hopefully one day we'll get there. And you're right. I mean, it's planning for the future as well. If you're if you're looking for people to learn these type of things, then you start early, and it becomes just a second nature to them. Then.
Yeah.
So, speaking of the future, you've got a book coming out soon, I understand.
Well, it's long overdue. I've got a couple of books in the mix as well. I published a book a couple of years ago with Dorling Kindersley about the 100 best board games in terms of games that have made the most impact on the world. Not necessarily the best in absolute terms. That was called Board Games in 100 Moves. For the last 3 or 4 years, I've been writing a book called The Dice Man with Steve Jackson about the history of the first 10 years of Games Workshop, which has been challenging in multiple ways. Trying to cast your mind back 45 years can be a bit blurry, I guess, to put it in mild terms, but I'm delighted that will be coming out hopefully by the end of this year. It's been published by a crowdfunding publisher called Unbound, and I'm delighted that we haven't been given too much stick for it being hugely late in being published, but hopefully the wait will be worth the while, because we put an awful lot of effort into getting the facts as right as possible and talk to colleagues and friends from years ago and trying to tell the story, warts and all, of the first 10 roller coaster years of Games Workshop existence. And the final book I'm working on at the moment is one for the 40th anniversary of Fighting Fantasy. So I'm going to the well one more time to do one more adventure.
Oh, nice.
Which is for next year. August 22 is the 40th anniversary.
Cool.
So can you tell us what the book is called?
I've no idea.
All right.
I'll pop a link up for the Dice Men one, so our viewers will be able to see that. And if they want to get a copy, they can still go to that website and
yeah, you can still pledge.
Excellent. So hear that, viewers? Go away and pledge. Find out the true story. Talking of things then coming up in the future, what sort of your predictions for the next 5-10 years of board gaming? What do you think we're likely to see coming through the chain? Any radical design changes you can see, or do you think we've sort of hit a bubble?
There's clearly a lot of derivatives around now, and blended mechanics, and probably too many games on the market now. There's been a huge revival, which I welcomed, obviously, as a games player and games collector myself. And I went to Essen in 2018, and I think there's something like 1,500 new titles out, or maybe more, and that's just too many. And I feel a bit sad that some people's great games might be missed because of the number that are out there. But obviously, it's been a great benefit the way the board games industry has revived, ironically, because of the internet and digital, because through crowdfunding sites like Kickstarter, you've been able to pre-sell games that would not ordinarily be made and reach global audiences, which you wouldn't be able to reach. You're totally dependent going through normal distribution channels. And of course, then there's great websites like BoardGamesGeek.com where you can review games and see whether games are any good. And then, of course, you've got e-commerce to be able to buy games that you might not be able to buy. And then you've got review sites such as the Dice Tower to listen to Tom Vassell saying whether or not a game's any good. So there's everything you could possibly want to be in the knowledge. And of course, last but not least, there are still amazingly great game shots, and it's great to see them opening again. So there's nothing better than browsing through a board game shop to see the latest games on the marketplace. But to answer your question, one thing I do know about the games industry, there's always innovation coming up, and we're always getting milestones in gaming history coming along that you never thought possible, and then we all become obsessed by them. So I remain permanently optimistic about more classics are going to sit on the shelves behind me coming through, but what they will be, no idea.
Cool. Same sort of question for video games. How do you see the video games industry developing over the next few years?
Well, the games industry has evolved hugely now. It's a $150 billion a year industry, some 3 billion people playing games, and the risk profile has changed. It used to be physical products sold at retail and having to navigate the supply chain and possibly suffer if the game wasn't received as well as the publisher or developer had wished, and you get lots of returns, and then having to manage that cash flow nightmare with inventory. But now, of course, a digital proposition, any studio can create content and serve it to global audiences free at the point of delivery and upsell content inside the games, or create other business models that can monetize these audiences. And of course, games have become a mass market phenomenon. It used to be seen as teenage boys locked in their bedrooms playing games, and now, of course, it's been a lot more accessible since Apple came along with swipe technology and the touchscreen. So anyone who never thought themselves as gamers can suddenly enjoy their games with a simple swiping their finger across the touchscreen. So you've seen the emergence of games like the match 3 games like Candy Crush and others, where you can snack on very casual content to your heart's content. And so the one thing I do know about the games is technology evolves it like no other. And every time there's a new technology, it's additive to the market rather than substitutional, like in music. PCs and consoles in the early days, and along comes Facebook, and people playing stuff like Farmville, and then along comes Apple, and then suddenly 50% of the games market is on mobile phones, and then the VR and the AR and mixed reality, and then people saying, I like watching other people playing games, like I like watching people play football better than me, which is most people, but I like to see best in class. So esports become with people watching other people playing games, and those players earning huge amounts in terms of in terms of sorry about my phone going off now.
No worries.
In terms of sponsorship and prize money, which is great, and then we see how games have become the third space where people are not just playing together but hanging out together. Games like Fortnite, where if creating a metaverse. So persistent worlds. The more we get to, with online multiplayer and persistent worlds and user-generated content and massively social experiences, it's moving games more towards what we are as human beings. So connected society with our avatars, which is our personal identity, with being able to create our own content, which is making a mark on the environment where we hang out. So you're going to see more and more games built around metaverse, and so it remains to be an incredibly exciting place to be.
Excellent. Any other questions, Adam?
No, I was just going to add to that comment. I mean, even from the beginning, we have quite a few friends who do talks about video gaming and gaming in general, and they mention identity and things like that. Strange how back in the day it was a kind of clandestine way of being the person you want to be in a game. Whether it be a barbarian or play as a different gender or something like that, or even different age or whatnot. And it's crazy how now. It's not crazy. It's welcoming that it's so open that you can do that in games now.
But the more things change, the more they become the same, as the French say. That these worlds are actually just D&D worlds, but in digital.
Yes, yeah. It's strange how things kind of come full circle in that way. Instead of fighting a goblin now, you might just be going fishing or something as a different avatar, but it's all the same. It's about I think it's about living the perfect life, really, in a way, to get away from the humdrum.
Well, shared experience is what we like as human beings. So you don't want to go see the perfect sunset or have the perfect meal on your own. You like to do it with other people. Shared experiences always give you that meta level of enjoyment.
I always use that explanation with cinema. You go to a movie because you want to laugh with other people and cry with other people, and you want to know, because we're insular beings, we want to know that we're feeling the same as other people. And I think everything that you've done so far has proven, that you can do that, which is incredible.
Well, for me, life is a game, and I'll carry on playing as long as I can.
Playing and
we hope you do.
Cool. Well, thank you very much for joining us today, and it's been absolutely marvelous to chat to you. And we hope that sort of when the world's a bit more back to normal, we might even tempt you along to one of our in-person conventions.
That'd be great. Look forward to it.
Lovely. Thank you very much.
Thank you.